It wasn't the fangs that haunt me. It was the way the children smiled, their tiny fingers pointing from the attic shadows, their eyes glowing like polished jet in the candlelight. Nightbound Bloodline presents 5 Vampire Horror Stories. Story 1. The Sanguine Smile of the Attic Children. What you are about to hear is a first-hand account, sent to us by a woman we will call Eliza, a former social worker, a rational woman trained to look for logical explanations for even the most troubling of behaviors. She insisted, in her lengthy correspondence, that what she found in that remote farmhouse defied all logic, all reason, and all mercy. She asks that we listen and believe. My name is Eliza. At the time, I was 34, a senior child protective services officer for the county. I'd seen a lot. Neglect, abuse, the dark corners of desperate homes. You build up a shell. You have to. I didn't believe in monsters. I believed in paperwork, evidence, and the deeply flawed, but very human, capacity for cruelty. Ghosts and goblins were for campfire stories. They were a relief, almost. A simpler kind of fear. The call came in on a Tuesday. An anonymous tip. A report of children living in squalor on the old Blackwood property, way out past the county line. The file was thin. The parents, a Mr. and Mrs. Valeska, were reclusive. No phone. No recent photos. My GPS gave out about a mile from the address, leaving me with a paper map and a growing sense of isolation. The rain started as a drizzle, then became a relentless, gray sheet, turning the dirt track into a river of mud. The woods here were different, too quiet. The usual chatter of birds, the scuttling of squirrels, it was all just absent, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The house was a 2-story Victorian, slumped and weeping under the weight of ivy and neglect. It smelled of damp rot and wet earth, a sweet, cloying decay that clung to the back of my throat. I knocked, the sound swallowed by the sheer mass of the place. The door was opened by a woman, Mrs. Valeska. She was pale, impossibly so, like porcelain. And she was beautiful in a way that felt sharp, fragile. Her eyes were alight, almost silver gray, and they didn't quite seem to focus on me. Mrs. Valeska? I'm Eliza from Child Services. We received a call about the well-being of your children. The children are resting. They are delicate. The light hurts their eyes. I need to see them, ma'am. It's protocol. She finally nodded and stepped aside. The interior was a tomb. Heavy velvet drapes blocked every window, and the only light came from a few scattered candles, their flames casting long, dancing shadows. The air was cold, a deep, stone cold that my jacket couldn't hope to penetrate, and it was silent, unnaturally so for a house with children. Mr. Valeska emerged from a back room. He was just as pale, just as unnervingly still. He didn't speak, only watched me with the same distant, silvery eyes. I felt a primal itch between my shoulder blades, the feeling you get when you're being sized up by a predator. I insisted again on seeing the children. Mrs. Valeska gave a thin, resigned smile. They are in the attic. They prefer it there. The world is less loud. I followed her up a narrow, winding staircase. The smell up here was different. Less of rot, more of copper, and old dust, and something else, something faintly floral and sickly, like funeral lilies. She unlocked a heavy, bolted door and pushed it open. The attic was vast and dark, the far corners lost in shadow. And there they were, 3 children, sitting perfectly still on the floor near a single guttering candle. A boy and 2 girls. They couldn't have been older than 6 or 7. They were as pale as their parents, with the same ethereal, sharp beauty. And they were all smiling. It wasn't a joyful smile. It was a wide, placid, empty stretch of the lips. Unblinking. Their eyes. God, their eyes. They were a solid, gleaming black, like obsidian, reflecting the candle flame back at me in twin pinpricks of light. The little boy tilted his head. His smile never wavered. You smell warm. My blood ran cold. Not a figure of speech, I felt the heat literally drain from my face. It was the way he said it. Not a comment, not an observation. A statement of fact, like a chef noting the temperature of a sauce. The little girl next to him slowly, deliberately, raised a single, tiny finger and pointed directly at my neck. I took a step back. My professional composure shattered. This was wrong. This was so profoundly, biologically wrong. I muttered some excuse, some promise to follow up, and I practically ran down those stairs. The parents were at the bottom, standing side by side, watching me descend. Their expressions hadn't changed. They were just waiting. I pushed past them, out the front door, and into the cleansing, cold rain. I didn't look back. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so violently I could barely get the car door open. I locked the doors, and as I started the engine and slammed the car into reverse, I glanced up at the house one last time. In the single, circular window of the attic, the one I could have sworn was boarded up, 3 small, pale faces were pressed against the glass. Their black eyes were fixed on me, and all 3 of them were still smiling that terrible, sanguine smile. I drove. I didn't care about the mud, the ruts in the road, the branches scraping against the side of my car. I just had to get away from that house, from those things wearing the skins of children. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, and a cold sweat had broken out all over my body. I could still smell that attic, the dust, the lilies, the faint, metallic tang of copper. I could still see those polished black eyes. It wasn't until I hit the paved road, the tires humming a frantic song of escape, that I dared to look in my rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty, just a dark tunnel through the weeping trees. But the feeling of being watched didn't fade. It clung to me like a shroud. I got back to the office, soaked and shaking. My supervisor took one look at me and asked if I was ill. I tried to file the report. I typed out the words, pale, reclusive, children exhibited unusual ocular characteristics. It sounded insane. I deleted it. How could I write? The children stated I smelled warm and looked at me as if I were a meal. I told my supervisor it was a false alarm, an overzealous tip from a neighbor with a grudge. I saw the doubt in his eyes, but he let it go. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. That night, the dream started. I was back in the attic, but the candle was out. I could hear them breathing in the darkness, small, soft, rhythmic breaths. And then the whispering. Not words, just sounds. The sound of something hungry. I'd wake up gasping, the phantom scent of lilies and copper in my nostrils. A week later, I was grocery shopping. It was a bright, sunny Saturday. The store was packed. I was in the produce section, looking at apples, trying to force some normalcy back into my life. And then I saw her, the little girl, the one who had pointed. She was at the end of the aisle, just standing there, wearing a pristine white dress. She was clean, her hair perfectly brushed, and she was smiling that same, vacant, placid smile. Our eyes met. Her black eyes seemed to absorb the fluorescent light, offering no reflection. She took a step towards me, then another. I dropped my basket. Oranges rolled across the floor. I didn't stop to pick them up. I turned and ran, pushing past startled shoppers, out into the parking lot, my heart trying to claw its way out of my throat. She couldn't be here. It was miles from that house, in broad daylight. It was impossible. It was a message, a reminder. We can find you. I quit my job the following Monday. I gave no real reason. I moved apartments. I got an unlisted number. I am not the person I was. I jump at shadows. I avoid children. The smell of lilies makes me nauseous. I know what I saw in that attic. They weren't human. They were something old, something that wears innocence as a disguise while it hunts. And I smelled warm. I know, with a certainty that chills my soul, that if I had stayed a moment longer, if I had been just a little less afraid, I would have learned exactly what that meant. The account of Eliza, a woman trained to confront the darkest aspects of humanity, only to find something infinitely darker lurking behind a child's smile. A reminder that the most ancient hungers often hide in the most innocent of vessels. Story 2. The Covenant of the Crimson Soil. Our next tale comes from a different kind of wilderness, not of forgotten forests, but of forgotten histories. It was sent to us by a man named Leo, an archaeologist who traded in dusty truths, until he unearthed a truth that was anything but dust. My name is Leo. I was 28, a PhD candidate specializing in late Roman burial practices. I was a man of science, of carbon dating and soil stratification. The supernatural was, to me, just the unclassified natural, a puzzle waiting for the right key. My key was a dig in a remote part of Transylvania, not far from the ruins of a fortress once occupied by a notoriously cruel nobleman, a man whose name was lost to all but the most obscure texts. We were there to study his victims. We had no idea we were digging up his larder. The site was a sloping field in the shadow of the Carpathians, a place local farmers refused to go after sundown. They called it Pamantal Sangiriu, the crimson soil. They claimed the earth was red from old blood. I, of course, dismissed it as superstitious nonsense. Iron oxide in the clay. Perfectly explainable. We'd been there a week. The team was small. Myself, 2 grad students, and a local hired hand named Andre, who crossed himself whenever we uncovered a bone. We were excavating a mass grave. The skeletons were a jumbled mess, all slashed vertebrae and crushed skulls, a testament to the nobleman's brutality. The heat was oppressive, the air thick with the smell of turned earth and something else, a faint, sweet smell like spoiled wine. Andre said it was the smell of the strigoi. I told him it was decaying organic matter. On the 8th day, we found it. Not a skeleton, a chamber buried deep beneath the grave. A single stone room sealed for centuries. The air that rushed out was frigid, carrying that sweet, cloying scent so strong it made my eyes water. Inside, there were no bones, no artifacts, just soil, a deep, loose loam that was a shocking, vibrant red. It was unnaturally cold to the touch, and it was pristine. No roots, no worms, no signs of life whatsoever. It was sterile, as if the very earth had been curated. Andre refused to go near it. He begged us to seal it back up, his face ashen. "This is not for the living," he kept saying. We laughed it off. We were scientists. We took samples. That night, in my tent, I cataloged the soil. It was then I noticed the first anomaly. My digital thermometer wouldn't register its temperature. The display just flickered, and the sample, it seemed to almost absorb the light from my lantern, looking darker, richer in the lamplight. That's when I heard it, a sound that shouldn't have been there. A low, rhythmic vibration, like a deep hum, coming from the direction of the sealed chamber. I unzipped my tent flap and looked out. The moon was full, bathing the field in a sickly silver light. And I saw them. Figures. Tall, impossibly slender, standing at the edge of the tree lane. They were just watching. They were dressed in dark, tattered robes that seemed to flutter in a wind I couldn't feel. Their faces were pale smudges in the darkness, but I could feel their gaze. It was a physical pressure, a cold spot on my soul. I woke the team. By the time we had flashlights, they were gone. But the feeling remained. The camp, which had felt isolated before, now felt besieged. We were being audited. Our presence was being tolerated, for now. The next day, we decided to close the chamber. It was no longer an archaeological find. It was a tomb we had violated. But when we went to cover it, we found our tools, the shovels, the picks, were gone. And in the center of the crimson soil, a single, perfect symbol had been drawn with a finger or a claw, a spiral descending into a point. That night, they came into the camp. I was awake, staring at the roof of my tent, every nerve screaming. The hum was back, closer now. It was inside my head. I saw a shadow fall across my tent, long, thin, with no discernible source. The zipper of my tent began to slowly, deliberately slide open. I froze. Pure, animal terror locked my limbs. The sweet, winery smell flooded in, so thick I could taste it on my tongue, metallic and rotten. A face peered in. It was gaunt, the skin stretched tight over sharp bone. The eyes were not black, like in the stories, but a pale, luminous silver, like molten mercury. There was no malice in that gaze, only a profound, ancient hunger, and an intelligence that saw me not as a man, but as a resource, as sustenance. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The message was clear in that look. You have disturbed the larder. You have woken the guardians. Now, you will be part of the stock. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying to a god I hadn't believed in since I was a boy. I don't know how long I stayed like that. When I opened them, it was dawn. The thing was gone. The camp was a wreck. Tents slashed, equipment smashed. Andre was gone. We never found him. We ran. We left everything and ran for the nearest village. The police called it a bear attack. A robbery. I didn't correct them. I never finished my thesis. I left archaeology. I know what we found. It wasn't a grave. It was a root cellar. And the things that tinned it, they are still there, waiting in the shadows, guardians of the crimson soil. And I live every day with the chilling certainty that my name is now, forever, on their inventory. A scholar of the dead who learned that some histories are not meant to be unearthed. Leo traded his trowel for a life of looking over his shoulder, a permanent resident of the shadow cast by the Covenant. Story 3. The Last Shift at the Midnight Morgue. Our third story ventures from ancient soil into the heart of modern, sterile horror. It comes from a woman named Anya, a night shift pathologist who learned that in the silence of the dead, something else is always listening. My name is Dr. Anya Sharma. I was 30 years old, and I had spent 5 years working the night shift at County General S. Morgue. I preferred it. The quiet, the lack of administrators. It was just me, the hum of the coolers, and the dead. I was a scientist. I dealt in facts, lividity, rigor mortis, the precise angle of an incision. The idea of something persisting after death was, to me, a comforting fairy tale for the living. I dealt with the aftermath. It was a Tuesday, a slow night. The only new intake was a John Doe, found in a derelict warehouse district. No ID, minimal personal effects. The cause of death was listed as exsanguination, apparent animal attack. When I pulled the sheet back, I felt the first prickle of unease. He was pale, not the waxy pallor of death, but an almost translucent, marble-like whiteness. His skin was cold in a way that felt deeper than the cooler could account for, a cold that seemed to leach the warmth from my own fingers through my gloves. And there were only 2 wounds. 2 precise, deep punctures on the side of his neck, clean, with no tearing. No animal did this. It looked surgical. I began my external examination. The silence in the room felt heavier than usual. Oppressive. The hum of the lights seemed to deepen, to take on a low, resonant frequency that vibrated in my teeth. I kept catching movement in my peripheral vision, a shifting shadow near the sinks, a flicker by the door. But every time I turned my head, there was nothing, just the long, empty rows of stainless steel. My own reflection, distorted and repeated. I picked up my scalpel to begin the Y incision, and that's when I heard it. A voice, dry, rasping, like pages turning in a dusty book. It came from directly behind me. Is it midnight yet? I spun around. The room was empty. My heart was hammering. I told myself it was fatigue, an auditory hallucination born of sleep deprivation and the sterile silence. I took a deep breath, turned back to the table, and froze. The body's head was turned. It was no longer facing the ceiling. Its clouded, gray eyes were fixed on the door. I hadn't moved it. I know I hadn't. A cold dread, entirely separate from the room's temperature, began to pool in my stomach. This was a violation of reality. My reality. Swallowing the bile rising in my throat, I reached out with a trembling hand to turn the head back. The moment my gloved fingers made contact with that icy skin, his hand shot up and locked around my wrist. The grip was iron, impossibly strong. The corpse's head turned slowly, deliberately, back towards me. The clouded eyes were clearing, the gray irises dissolving into a sharp, predatory silver. They focused on me with an intelligence that was utterly, terrifyingly alien. The lips, dry and cracked, parted. The sun is a cage. The night is freedom. You are a key. I screamed and wrenched my arm back, stumbling away from the table, knocking over my instrument tray. The clatter was deafening in the silent room. The body on the slab didn't sit up. It simply rose. A smooth, fluid, unhurried motion, as if lifted by invisible strings. It swung its legs over the side of the gurney and stood, its movements graceful, utterly assured. It was no longer a it. It was a he, and he was hungry. He took a step towards me. I was backed against the wall, my panic a live wire in my chest. The emergency call button was across the room. Useless. He smiled, and I saw the elongated canines, sharp and pristine. This wasn't a victim of an animal attack. This was the animal, and he had been playing dead. Your shift is over, doctor. In a burst of pure adrenaline, I grabbed a large glass jar of formalin and hurled it at him. It shattered against his chest, the pungent chemical splashing everywhere. He didn't flinch. He didn't even seem to notice. He just kept coming. I ducked under his reaching arm, my legs like jelly, and ran for the door. I didn't look back. I slammed through the double doors, into the bright, empty hallway, and didn't stop running until I was outside, gulping in the cold, blessedly normal night air. I never went back. I resigned via email. I told them it was a family emergency. What was I supposed to say? That a corpse reanimated and tried to make me its midnight snack? They found the morgue in disarray, the John Doe gone. They assumed it was a bizarre theft, a body snatched for parts. I know the truth. He wasn't dead. Not in any way we understand. He was waiting, resting, and I had been about to cut him open. I live with the sound of his voice, the feel of that icy grip on my wrist. I've traded my scrubs for a night light and a lock on my bedroom door, because I know now that death isn't the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a very, very long night. A woman of science who discovered that the most terrifying mysteries are not found in textbooks, but waiting on a cold steel slab in the dead of night. Anya learned that some patients check themselves out, and that the graveyard shift is a literal term. Story 4. The Bargain of the Pale Court. Our penultimate story takes us from the sterile modern world into the gilded cages of old money and ancient appetites. It was sent to us by a man named Julian, an antiques dealer who discovered that the most valuable items come with a price written in blood, not currency. My name is Julian Croft. I was 45, the proprietor of Croft & Company. Antiquities. I dealt in Georgian silver, pre-war portraiture, first editions. I was a connoisseur of dust and provenance. My life was one of quiet, curated beauty. I didn't believe in curses or haunted objects. I believed in market value and the fickle nature of taste. My arrogance, it seems, was the bait. The man who walked in that evening was memorable. Impeccably dressed in a suit that seemed to drink the light, his hair silvered at the temples. He introduced himself as Mr. Valerius. His handshake was cool, his grip firm. He had the air of old European money, the kind that predates republics. He was looking for something specific, he said. A set of 4 Venetian goblets, rumored to have been crafted for a particular family. A family with a noted aversion to sunlight. I told him such items were the stuff of legend. He smiled, a thin, bloodless line. Legends, he said, are often just history that has been mislaid. A week later, I found them. In a forgotten estate sale in the countryside, tucked away in a velvet-lined case. The goblets were exquisite. Blown glass, so clear it seemed to be made of frozen air, with stems of intricately woven silver that felt like cold, metallic lace. I felt a thrill of triumph. This was the find of a lifetime. But as I packed them, I noticed a strange detail. The silver wasn't tarnished. Not a spot. It was as bright as the day it was forged, despite the dealer's claim they were over 3 centuries old. And the glass, when I held it to the light, it had a faint, rosy hue, as if stained by a long evaporated wine. Mr. Valerius returned the day after I listed them. His pleasure was palpable, a quiet, intense satisfaction that felt hungry. He paid my exorbitant price without hesitation. In cash, the bills were crisp, new, but they felt oddly cold to the touch. As he was leaving, case in hand, he paused at the door. "You have a good eye, Mr. Croft. An eye for quality. We appreciate that. The court is always in need of procurers of fine taste. Should you ever wish for a more exclusive clientele, present this at the address on the card after sundown." He handed me a card. It was heavy, black vellum, embossed with a silver crest I didn't recognize. There was no name, no phone number, just an address in the oldest, most secluded part of the city. I tucked it away, flattered but dismissive. A curiosity. Business dwindled after that. A strange run of bad luck. A flood in the storage room. A fire at a key supplier. Within 6 months, I was staring at bankruptcy. Desperation is a poison. It clouds judgment. I remembered the card. The Pale Court. It sounded like a private club, a gathering of eccentric collectors. A potential lifeline. That night, fueled by a cheap bottle of bourbon and sheer dread, I went to the address. It was a towering, narrow townhouse, squeezed between 2 larger buildings as if trying to hide. The door was opened by a silent, pale man in livery. He took the card and gestured me inside. The interior was breathtaking, opulent in a way I'd only seen in museums. But it was silent, eerily so. There was no music, no chatter, just the soft rustle of silk and the occasional, soft clink of a glass. The people, the court, were all like Mr. Valerius. Impeccably dressed, unervingly still, their paleness a stark contrast to the rich, dark colors of the room. Their eyes tracked me as I was led through the halls. They didn't look curious. They looked appraising. I was brought before a woman they called the Contessa. She was the most beautiful and terrifying person I had ever seen. Her beauty was a weapon, sharp and ancient. She didn't speak. She simply looked at me, and Mr. Valerius, standing beside her, translated her silent commands. "The Contessa is pleased with your service. She requires another item, a specific locket, last seen in the possession of a minor noble family in Prague. Acquire it. Your debts will be settled." It was not a request. It was a transaction. My soul for my solvency. I was in too deep to refuse. I found the locket. It was a difficult, expensive acquisition. When I delivered it, the Contessa opened it. Inside was not a painting, but a tiny, desiccated flower, brown and fragile. She brought it to her nose and inhaled, a long, slow breath, and a flicker of something like memory or hunger passed over her face. She nodded. The next day, a mysterious investor paid all my debts. My business was saved. But the court wasn't done with me. They never are. The requests kept coming. A journal from a Salem judge. A signet ring from a Roman senator. Each item more obscure, more macabre. With each delivery, I was paid handsomely, but I was also diminished. I felt older, weaker. The colors of the world seemed less vibrant. I was a tool they were wearing down. The final request was for a baptismal record from a specific family line. A living family. My family. My grandmother's name was on the document they wanted. That's when I understood. I wasn't just a procurer of objects. I was a procurer of connections, of histories tied to bloodlines. They weren't collecting artifacts. They were collecting access. To people. To lives. I refused. I sent a message, trembling as I wrote it. The reply came not by post, but by a visitor. Mr. Valerius, standing in my shop after closing. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed. "A bargain is a bargain, Julian. You took our currency. You enjoyed our patronage. The court does not release its assets so easily. We will have what is owed, one way or another. I sold everything. The shop, my apartment, my own collection. I moved across the country. I live in a small, anonymous rental surrounded by cheap, new furniture. Nothing with a history, nothing they can use. But I see them sometimes in the crowds. A pale face that holds my gaze a second too long. A figure standing under a street lamp in the rain, watching my window. They are patient. They have forever. I am just a temporary holding. A story, soon to be added to their collection. A man who traded in the past, only to find himself sold into a future of endless, gilded dread. Julian learned that some debts cannot be repaid with money, only with a piece of your very being, delivered piece by piece to the pale court. Story 5. The Keeper of the Crossroad Beasts. Our final story brings us to the open road, where the yellow lines are the only guides through a landscape that belongs to things much older than asphalt. This account comes from a long-haul trucker who goes by the handle Harpy. She didn't believe in roadside legends, but the legends, it seems, believed in her. My name is Jenna, but on the CB, I'm Harpy. I was 39, been driving rigs for 15 years. I'd seen every weird little town and lonely stretch of highway this country has to offer. I thought I'd seen it all, but I'd never taken the old Meridian Road after dark. They say something guards that pass, something that herds travelers like sheep. They say if you see its eyes, you never make it to the other side. They were right. Name's Jenna. On the channel, I'm Harpy. 39 years old, 15 years behind the wheel of a long-haul Peterbilt. I've seen every kind of crazy this country can throw at you. Dust storms in Arizona, black ice in the Dakotas, weirdos at all-night truck stops. You get a feel for the road. You learn which stories are just bullshit to spook the new guys. The story about the old Meridian Road? I'd heard it. They said something lived in the past, something that didn't like headlights. I called it fairy tale nonsense, until I had no other choice. It was a high-priority load. Medical equipment. Had to be in Spokane by 6 a.m. My usual route was shut down. A tanker spill. A 100-mile detour. The only way to make the deadline was to cut through the mountains on the old Meridian. My dispatcher, Sal, even came on the CB, his voice tight. Harpy, you copy? Weather Service is saying that squall line is gonna sit right on top of the pass. You sure about this? That road's, it's bad news after dark. I told him I didn't believe in ghost stories. I was a woman of diesel and deadlines. But the first few miles in, the feeling started. It's a two-lane road, carved right through the granite. So narrow the pines on either side form a tunnel. A perfect, pitch-black tunnel. My high beams just got swallowed up. And the silence, it was wrong. No crickets, no wind in the trees. Just the sound of my rig and the rain starting to hit the windshield. It was a hard, angry rain, like the sky was trying to wash the road right off the mountain. That's when I saw the first one. A shape, low to the ground, loping across the road about 100 yards ahead. It was too big for a coyote, too lean for a bear. It moved in a series of jerky, powerful strides. My headlights caught the glint of its eyes, not the reflected green of an animal, but a dull, flat orange, like embers. It disappeared into the pines on the other side. My hands were clenched on the wheel. Just a wolf, I told myself. A big, mangy wolf. Tilworn backhack. I grabbed the mic. Who's there? This is Harpy, come back. Nothing but static. Then, another one. This one was closer. It didn't cross the road. It stood at the tree line, keeping pace with my truck. It was tall, walking on two legs, but hunched, its silhouette a jagged mess of angles against the pines. And its eyes, God, its eyes were the same smoldering orange. It was hurting me, pushing me forward, deeper into the pass. I wasn't just being watched, I was being driven. Panic started to set in, a cold, metallic taste in my mouth. I tried to call Sal. The CB was dead. Not even static. Just a dead, empty hiss. My phone had no signal. I was alone. That's when I saw the third one, right in the middle of the road. It was bigger than the others. It sat on its haunches, a hulking, shadowy mass. It wasn't moving. It was waiting. As I got closer, my headlights finally painted it in detail. It had the rough, shaggy shape of a wolf, but its shoulders were bunched with muscle like a grizzly's. Its head was a nightmare, an elongated snout filled with teeth that were too long, too many. And its eyes, they weren't just orange. They were intelligent. They were ancient. They looked at my truck, at me, with a calm, possessive certainty. I slammed on the air horn. The sound was a physical blast in the silent pass. The creature didn't flinch. It just tilted its head, as if curious about the noise. It was then I understood. I wasn't on a road. I was in a territory, and I was trespassing. I swerved, jerking the wheel hard, my trailer skidding on the wet asphalt. I missed it by inches. In my side mirror, I saw it stand up on its hind legs, unfolding to a terrifying height, and let out a sound that wasn't a howl. It was a deep, guttural roar that vibrated through the very frame of my truck, a sound of pure, predatory dominion. I didn't let off the gas. I drove like the devil himself was on my bumper. I didn't breathe until I saw the lights of the first town on the other side of the pass, a glow in the valley below. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I pulled into the first truck stop I found, my whole body shaking so bad I could barely shut the engine off. I sat there for an hour, just staring at my hands. I never made that delivery. I called Sal, told him I was sick. I took a week off. No, I quit. I sold my rig. I drive a delivery van now. Local routes. Home every night. I don't go out after dark. And I never, ever look at the tree line when I'm on the highway. Because I know what's in those woods. They're not just woods. They're a hunting ground. And the things that live there, the keepers of the crossroads, they remember the ones who get away. They consider it a temporary condition. 5 accounts. 5 brushes with the ancient, the hungry, and the utterly inhuman. From the attic to the archive, the morgue to the mountain pass, a common thread emerges. A world that operates just beneath the thin veneer of our own, a world with its own rules, its own citizens, and its own relentless appetites. Eliza, the social worker, learned that innocence can be a cage for something ancient. Leo, the archaeologist, discovered that some graves are not for the dead, but for the sleeping. Anya, the pathologist, found that death is not always a final state. Julian, the antiques dealer, saw that a soul can be bartered away, piece by precious piece. And Harpy, the trucker, was reminded that the old roads belong to things much older than pavement. These are their stories, but we know there are more. Have you ever felt a presence in an empty room? Heard a whisper in a silent house? Seen something at the edge of the woods that defied explanation? We want to hear from you. Share your encounters in the comments below. If you dare to walk these shadowed paths with us, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. This has been Nightbound Bloodline. Thank you for listening. Until next time, sleep with one eye open.